This is a series on the sustainability of planet Earth. Follow us in episode 1, where we'll be featuring the Foundation for Sustainable Forests. We will also be addressing how best practices forestry management can also address the very serious issues that planet Earth is having with climate change. So, follow us through the Floral Rose Forest in Girard, Pennsylvania, with Forester Guy Dunkel from the Foundation of Sustainable Forests.
Great. All yours. All right. So my name's Guy. I'm a forester with the Foundation for Sustainable Forests. We are a nonprofit land trust based in northwestern Pennsylvania. What defines us basically is our efforts to protect forest land and conserve forests, but to keep them working and keep them also a part of the local economy and the local community, right? So you may be familiar with other land trusts that are substantially larger, but more commonplace, like the Nature Conservancy, for example, and we're like a tiny version of a group like that. But like I said, what separates us from other land trusts is our focus on working lands and our efforts to keep this forest supporting local jobs. The idea here, we kind of jokingly identify ourselves as tree huggers with chainsaws, right? The idea is that forests and healthy forest ecosystems are very important, but also forest products are very important, right? Everybody here blows their nose and they use paper and things like that. So we all benefit from the products we get from forests. And so the mission for the Foundation for Sustainable Forests is to find that intersection between healthy, productive forest ecosystems and also meeting human needs, right? If we said that what we want to accomplish is meeting human needs above all else, well then the result of that is very poor forest management, right? Abusive logging, etc. And if we said that what we want to accomplish is healthy forest ecosystems above all else, the result of that is the lack of production of what people need and the loss of the jobs that depend on those forests, right? So we're trying to find that intersection, and I think we've got a model that I'll show you that has accomplished both of those things to a degree, right? In that direction, we'll do a little loop through some of the different, and look at some of the different types of forest management that we're practicing. If you look around, you'll see some trees that have blue paint on them. Those are trees that have been designated for harvest. There's a large red maple behind us there. Actually, the tree right behind you's got some old blue paint on it, but marked for harvest. Traditionally, when landowners think about cutting timber, their decision about which trees to cut relates to size, right? Because people typically think that diameter of trees is an equivalent for tree maturity, right? They say, I want to cut my big trees to let the little trees grow. That's a very common concept, right? What we're trying to do here instead is evaluate tree maturity based on things like health, indicators of health. So crown condition, presence of rot, presence of structural defects, cracks, things like that, right? My argument is that those indicators of health are also good indicators of maturity. Debunks the idea that diameter equals maturity, right? Diameter does not equal age, it does not equal maturity. Diameter just equals size. That's all it means, right? So what that tells us is that if we cut our big trees and let our little ones grow, are we cutting out the old trees and letting the young ones go? Is that what's happening? No. What's happening instead is we're cutting out the trees that grew the best. The trees that had the best genetics, they had the best microsite, they outcompeted their neighbors. Essentially, we're cutting out the winners and allowing our new forest to be constituted by losers, trees that just didn't have what it took to survive, right? Didn't have what it took to thrive. So that's a really important point, is that when we're selecting trees for harvest, we don't want to pay attention to size. We want to think about, what is that tree like now? How did it get there? And does that indicate to us how it will do in the future, right? Any ideas? Giant rotten hole in the bottom. Yep, that's the big one. You can also see, so this tells us the tree has some structural issues, right? It could blow over at some point in time. As you look up the tree, you see a number of knots and branches and some twists to the trunk, right? So from an economic standpoint, from a human dollar and cent standpoint, this tree is going to yield lower value products and it's worth less to us in the future, right? It's declining. From a health standpoint, it's also declining. Sense. The numbers also support us doing the right thing. If we cut that tree, the acceleration in growth and the increase in value in this tree on a 20, 30, 40, 50 year time frame will make much more money for us, right? So that's really important. That's what makes sustainable forestry work from a financial standpoint, is expanding the time frame forestry practices, right? That people have a financial incentive to do the wrong thing in the forest, right? So that's one of the three biggest threats that people face. We call that high grading, when people cut the valuable trees and leave the low value, less desirable trees behind, right? So high grading is one of the big three. The second threat that our forests face, I don't know how eminent it is, but it's certainly going to have a substantial impact, is climate change, right? We know that the forests in this area are going to change over time here, over the next few decades and centuries. We don't know how they're going to change. We can't really anticipate that, but we know that that's going to have a big impact, not just on trees, but on the other plants and animals that live in this forest, right? So climate change is kind of this looming threat that we know we have to prepare for, but we're not exactly sure how to prepare for it because we don't know what impact it's going to have, right? So my strategy in managing for climate change has been primarily to promote tree resiliency, right? My idea has been that when climate change comes, we don't know what it's going to look like, but we do know that a forest full of trees that are very vigorous, growing fast at the peak of their health, etc., are going to have the most resiliency and be able to. Resiliency is going to be the diversity of a forest, right? So, in other words, if we have a forest full of one species, we'll say hemlock, and we get an insect like hemlock woolly adelgid, or we have a change in the climate, in the temperature, and hemlock is no longer able to thrive here, then our forest is just not going to bounce back from that very well. But if we have a forest full of different species, then regardless of what comes down the pike, we're just more likely to be able to bounce back, right? The other factor in diversity that's not talked about as much as species diversity is age diversity, right? I want to have a forest that has multiple age classes. The type of management I'm trying to practice is low intensity but high frequency. I want to be here cutting trees every 5 or 10 years. I won't take a whole lot of trees out in most instances, but I want to introduce light very often. Ideally, that means I'll be starting new age classes very often. So if we have a big wind event that comes in and knocks down our tall trees that are sticking way up in the air, it's not a problem. We've got young trees to replace them, right? The third threat that our forests face, and that's pests and non-native plants, right? So we've got things like hemlock woolly adelgid, which is an insect from Asia. It's been introduced to this area on nursery stock and plants like that. It's spreading through the forests of the New England, northeastern United States, and it's killing hemlock trees because they just don't have a natural resistance to that non-native pest, right? Anyone familiar with any other forest pests?
Emerald ash borer.
Yeah, so emerald ash borer is another Asian insect that came over, I think, in packing stocks or chipwood or something like that, not on nursery stock. Another one would be Asian longhorn beetle. If anyone's from Massachusetts or southern Ohio, you may have heard of Asian longhorn beetle. And then there's a whole host of things called invasive species, invasive area, that have been introduced and are starting to take over or have a substantial impact on the makeup of our forests, right? Some of those would be Japanese knotweed, multiflora rose, Japanese barberry, garlic mustard, Japanese stilt grass. There's a whole host of species that are just not from Pennsylvania, but they're starting to become very common in our forests. They can change the soil chemistry so that tree species mycorrhizal fungi and different things don't do as well in our forest soil. Native invasives, right? So people have changed our forests enough that some of our native plants, like American beech, can have a negative impact on our forest because they start to take over. So what happens is American beech is a very low value species from a dollar standpoint, right? If people are cutting timber and thinking about dollars, they often leave behind beech because it's just not worth much money, right? If you repeat that process over time, over a few decades, multiple harvests, you can overrepresent beech in the forest, right? So we start to have more beech than is natural because it was just left behind and left behind, right? Then another interesting thing that happens with some species, and American beech is one of them, is that they root sucker. So if you look behind you, American beech stump, because we were trying to reverse the impacts of bad logging, right? So we cut that beech tree down, but the root system stayed alive, and if you look behind you and all around you, everything with this bright silver bark is American beech, right? You see all those little seedlings out there? And so it's a problem that we've got this little area that's now a monoculture of 100% nothing but American beech, right? So this was the beech tree, and these are all what we call sons of beeches. I only have 2 good forestry jokes, and that's one of them. So essentially we did a little clear cut, right? We took all of those over mature trees out, we harvested them all in the space of 3 or 4 acres, right? And that put enough sunlight on the ground. It was a big enough disturbance event to let the new cohort of trees establish itself, right? So at that time, 15, 20 years ago, for these few acres, that was a very, I don't know if it was harmful, but it was a significant impact to that forest, right? We drastically changed that forest. But coming back 15 or 20 years later, now we have this very vigorous young stand with good species diversity, nice crowns, and really good potential for the future. So this is a little example to show you that part of our sustainable forestry is having an impact, a substantial impact, but if we do it in small areas scattered across the forest, then taken in the context of the landscape, it becomes sustainable, right? If we did that to thousands of acres in Erie County, I would make the argument that that's not good forestry, right? To have that significant of an impact, little chances, 3 acres here, 3 acres over there, a couple properties down the road, we take a 3-acre chance there. Even if something screws up and doesn't work the way we want it to, we still haven't put all our eggs in that basket and we haven't messed up the whole system, right? And if we do things very thoughtfully and carefully, most of the time it's gonna succeed, and we're gonna have these type of results, right? So that again is the idea of low impact but high frequency, right? We took a chance here. It was high impact on this small area, but taken in the context, a lot of the rest of this forest looks just like it did 15 or 20 years ago, right? So that model of low impact, high frequency costs more money. It's not as desirable for people thinking short-term profits, but as far as the success of the forestry system, we're just more likely to succeed and accomplish our long-term goals, right?
Please now go to YouTube for part 2. Go to Sustainability of Planet Earth, Episode 1, Part 2, featuring the Foundation for Sustainable Forest, and we will rejoin Guy on his tour of the Flora Rose, and we will observe his method of the fall of a tree while it is being harvested.